I'm pregnant, and it's yours." Those 5 words shattered my world. It was Sarah, my wife's twin sister, standing at the door with that look on her face, half guilty, half terrified. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My brain was desperately trying to connect the dots, but nothing made sense. How could she be pregnant with my child? I loved Emily, my wife. This was impossible. Yet there she stood, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, waiting for me to respond to a truth I wasn't ready to face. Emily and I had been married for 5 years, and life with her was everything I had ever wanted. We were high school sweethearts who'd made it through the ups and downs of growing up together, always coming out stronger. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but we were a team. We shared everything, from our hopes for a family to the smallest details of our everyday lives. Emily was my rock, my safe place. But the one thing we couldn't seem to share was a child. We'd been trying for years with no success. Each failed pregnancy test brought a little more distance between us. It wasn't her fault, I knew that. Still, I could see the toll it was taking on her. And when she hurt, I hurt. Sarah, her twin sister, was always there, supporting Emily. They were inseparable, 2 halves of the same person. Sarah had her wild side, but they balanced each other out in a way that only twins could. Sarah had been a part of my life as long as Emily had. I was used to having her around, her energy filling whatever room she walked into. She was bold, where Emily was more reserved, always ready to take risks, push boundaries. And I admired that about her until admiration turned into something much darker. I didn't know when it started, but somewhere along the line, Sarah's presence began to feel different. At first, it was small things, Sarah touching my arm a little too often or standing a little too close when Emily wasn't looking. I ignored it, convinced it was all in my head. After all, she was my sister-in-law. There was no way she'd cross that line. I trusted her. I trusted myself. But then the small things started to grow into something more uncomfortable. When Emily wasn't around, Sarah would say things, suggestive things that felt off but were always masked by a laugh or a joke. I never told Emily. I didn't want to cause trouble between the 2 people I loved most. Besides, what would I even say? Sarah hadn't done anything, not really. It was just a weird feeling, and I didn't want to make it into something bigger than it was. But now, with her standing in front of me, pregnant and saying the child was mine, all those moments came flooding back with a clarity I didn't want to accept. As Sarah stood there, her words echoed in my head. I tried to find my voice, but it was like my throat had closed up. "How?" was all I managed to choke out. Her face paled, and she looked away, unable to meet my eyes. That's when the full weight of it hit me. She had tricked me. One night, months ago, after too many drinks, I remembered waking up confused, thinking it was Emily in bed with me. I had been groggy, disoriented, but I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? I remember thinking it was strange the next morning Emily had acted like nothing had happened. She didn't mention anything about the night before. But I chalked it up to a weird dream and pushed it out of my mind. Now, standing there, I realized it hadn't been Emily at all. It had been Sarah. My stomach churned, and bile rose in my throat. How could I have been so blind? I felt disgusted with myself, with her, with everything. Sarah tried to explain, but her words were like static in my ears. She talked about feeling alone, about being jealous of what Emily and I had, about how she had convinced herself that I wanted her, too. It was all a blur. I didn't care about her reasons. Nothing could justify what she had done, what we had done, unknowingly or not. I felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of the situation. There was no escape from this nightmare. As she spoke, all I could think about was Emily. My wife. The woman I had promised to love and protect. How could I ever look her in the eye again? How could I explain this? And what about the baby? The thought of Sarah carrying my child made me feel sick. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal on the deepest level, and there was no going back. I wanted to scream, to cry, to make it all go away. But none of that would change the reality staring me in the face. Every time Sarah said the word baby, I felt like I was being punched in the gut. I didn't want to be a father like this. I didn't want this to be my life. I didn't want to be tied to her forever because of one terrible, twisted night. But I couldn't undo it. And I couldn't hide from it. Sarah's eyes were pleading with me for some kind of response, some kind of reassurance. But all I could do was stand there, numb, my mind spinning with what this meant for me, for Emily, for us. That night, I didn't go home. I couldn't. I wandered the streets aimlessly, trying to make sense of it all. How had things gotten so out of control? When had my life taken this turn? My mind kept circling back to Emily. I loved her. But how could I ever tell her what had happened? How could I break her heart like this? The guilt was unbearable, but the truth felt like a death sentence. I couldn't bring myself to destroy her world the way mine had been shattered. Days passed, and I avoided Sarah's calls. I couldn't face her. I didn't want to hear any more about the baby or the future or anything. I didn't want this to be real. But I knew I couldn't run forever. Eventually, I had to make a decision. Sarah wanted me to be involved. She was adamant about keeping the baby, raising it, whether I was part of it or not. I wasn't ready for any of it. I couldn't even comprehend the idea of being a father, much less the father of my wife's twin sister's child. When I finally went home to Emily, everything felt wrong. She could sense that something was off, but I lied. I told her I had been stressed with work, that I needed some time to think. She believed me because she trusted me. And that made it so much worse. Every time I saw her smile, every time she kissed me or told me she loved me, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. How could I keep this secret from her? How long before everything came crashing down? In the end, I had no choice. I couldn't keep living this lie. The guilt was eating me alive. So one night, after dinner, I sat her down. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to find the words. I told her everything, about Sarah, about the night I didn't realize what had happened, about the baby. Her face went pale, her eyes wide with shock, disbelief, and then, heartbreak. I watched as the person I loved most in the world crumbled before my eyes, and I knew there was no going back. The silence that followed after I told Emily was unbearable. She didn't scream, didn't cry, not at first. She just stared at me, like she was looking at a stranger. And in that moment, I realized that's what I had become. I had betrayed her in a way I never imagined possible. No matter how much I tried to explain, there was nothing I could say that would make this right. The damage was done. The person she trusted most had shattered her world, and I couldn't undo that. The days after were a blur. Emily couldn't even stand to be in the same room as me. Every attempt to talk was met with cold silence or short, emotionless responses. She had always been strong, but I had never seen her like this, broken, distant, a shell of the person I had fallen in love with. She packed a bag and left to stay with her parents, leaving me alone in a house that suddenly felt like a tomb. Every corner reminded me of her, of us, of what I had ruined. I reached out to Sarah, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. She was still carrying my child, and no matter how much I hated what had happened, there was a life involved now. I couldn't just walk away from that. But every conversation with Sarah felt like reopening a wound. She was conflicted too. Part of her wanted me in the baby's life, but another part seemed to understand that this situation was too complicated, too painful for anyone to come out unscathed. Emily didn't want anything to do with Sarah. She told me that much in a cold, matter-of-fact text message. I can't look at her, she said. I can't even think about her. I knew that if there was any hope of us moving forward, I'd have to respect that. But the reality was, Sarah wasn't going anywhere. She was carrying my child, and that meant she would always be a part of my life. No matter how hard I tried to distance myself from her, I was bound to her in a way I couldn't escape. Months went by, and the weight of what I had done pressed down on me every single day. Emily and I barely spoke. Sarah had the baby, a girl. I felt a mixture of guilt, shame, and confusion when I first held her. She was innocent in all of this, and yet, her existence was a constant reminder of my betrayal. As much as I wanted to be her father, I couldn't shake the feeling that my presence would only complicate things more. I was torn between doing what was right and facing the reality that my actions had forever changed the lives of the people I loved. Have you ever made a mistake so big it felt like your entire world was collapsing? What would you do if you were in my shoes?
Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss new content. Share your thoughts and ideas in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think and what you'd like to see next. And if you want to keep watching more videos like this one, just click on the next video. See you there.